So 6 months, why the delay?
So there are a number of areas of the bill that need to be reviewed and revised based on the best practices we've seen in other states. This version, of course, was written for the ballot roughly a year and a half before it actually was voted on by the people. A lot's changed in some of the other states, and some of the parts of the bill really need some work. For example, the tax rate, there are questions around addiction and public health and public safety that are either not addressed or we can do a better job based on what we're seeing in the other states.
So from what I understand, only 6 lawmakers were present and voted this passed?
So in the informal sessions, any member can object, and there were members who were very, very well aware that this was being worked on. These were the folks who were most deeply involved in it, and so there was no objections from them in the end, and so we were able to move it through. All we're doing is delaying by 6 months and putting in a benchmark study authorization for the administration so we can do the homework necessary, so we can do longitudinal research about the effects of the use of recreational marijuana here in the Commonwealth.
There's been a lot of talk about respecting the will of the people. That's a phrase that the governors use. And, I'm just curious if you think that deviating from the legislation that was passed, the language that was passed, the deadlines that were passed in question 4, is that respecting the will of the people?
Absolutely. The people basically voted that they wanted recreational marijuana. It was a very, very big, complicated bill, and virtually every ballot question that comes to us from the public after it's been voted goes through some review and some revisions, some pretty quickly and some years later. So this is not unusual. The people voted in principle. We're going to obey that principle. We're going to support their will. What we're doing is working on the details. For example, most of us who've looked at this don't have a clue whether there's enough money from that tax rate to actually pay for setting up the agency, for doing the licensing, for doing the enforcement, and there also have to be considerations for public safety and for public health. So we need a tax rate that is fair and reasonable, and this tax rate is about half or less of the tax rate in the other states. So they made a good faith effort, but we have to stand up the agency and we have to finance it. Another example would be homegrown. In most states that are going to have homegrown, 12 plants is a lot of plants for homegrown, and many of the other states have half or less, and some states have outlawed it completely. So we realize that the people voted for this and homegrown is in there, but we have a right to take a look at that and determine whether 12 plants is a reasonable amount to have in someone's home.
But
So it sounds like
12, right?
it sounds like
It's 12 right now, and it stays 12 until and unless the law gets changed.
But it does sound like there could be other changes afoot. I mean, if this is just 6 months
Oh,
to
we're going to
study
review the whole
everything.
bill. We're going to review the whole bill, and we're going to determine which parts need to be changed and which have priority, and get right to it. Because we are going to get this implemented, and we're going to get it implemented soon.
Mr. President, you voted in favor of the bill, but I don't
I
recall
did.
you raising these sorts of criticisms.
Oh, I did
about
all the way through.
About the number of plants?
I raised all kinds of questions. I didn't give an exhaustive list, but I raised all kinds of questions.
And when will this full review, the more omnibus marijuana bill, be completed and sent to the governor?
The hope is that we will have it on the governor's desk in time for it to be smoothly implemented starting 6 months from now.
Was he aware that you were voting on this today?
The governor, there's been communication with the governor's office, yes.
So what happens now?
So the governor gets to decide whether he's going to sign it, and we're going to pass an order to create a committee, and then the committee will get named, and the committee will go to work.
Do you think that this delay would have passed in a formal session?
Yes, absolutely.
Then why not do it in a formal session?
Because we don't have a formal session right now, and every day that goes by
Well, waiting until
is a
next
day.
month.
Sorry?
Waiting until next month.
Well, that was the point. We started talking about the delay about 3 weeks ago. It took this long to negotiate the delay that we have. And since I voted for it and we want to uphold the will of the voters, we want to get this done as quickly as possible. And once you get to the formal sessions, there are a whole series of other steps that we would have to go through now. We would have to file a bill and then go through the public hearing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is an agreement in principle that a reasonable and short, 6 months is a reasonably short delay, is enough time to do the work that we need to do. And that will put us under pressure, believe me.